Time for business news now with Stephen Carl. Stephen, you've been looking at the economic cost of the measures announced by the French president Wednesday night.
The French Finance Ministry says that closing non-essential shops and schools will cost the state 11 billion euros. That's as government aid programmes will be extended to businesses that are closed, and parents that can't work remotely will be given access to the government's furlough scheme, which pays around 85% of their net salaries. The dip in economic activity is expected to be less than the first lockdown last spring, but greater than in November when schools had remained open. Companies are now scrambling to reorganise for parents who'll have to stay home, as Camille Nedelec reports.
At this lab of 500 workers, the weekend team has come to the rescue. Already they've been called in to help replace colleagues who've had to take time off when their children's classes were closed due to coronavirus cases. And now they'll be even more in demand.
Par rapport à l'organisation de la famille et tout le monde, mais on fait des efforts en fait pour compenser aussi les contraintes au niveau de la production.
To keep producing doses of anaesthetic at its usual levels, the lab is left rejuggling employee schedules.
Il est fort probable qu'avec cette fermeture et cette anticipation des vacances scolaires, les collaborateurs prennent un peu plus de congés pour être avec leurs enfants.
Those employees stuck at home when able to work will be able to access the government furlough scheme, which has cost public coffers over 27 billion euros since the start of the pandemic. This flour delivery service has 60 workers and 2,000 deliveries to make a day. Just like the lab, it's impossible to work remotely.
Étant responsable de l'atelier, je dois aussi être présente et j'ai envie surtout d'être là. Et j'ai envie d'accompagner l'équipe et j'ai pas envie de lâcher mon travail.
The head of the firm is ready to adapt to workers' needs as much as possible.
On peut faire par exemple 2 tours, un tour le matin, un tour l'après-midi pour les équipes, de telle façon à ce qu'ils puissent moduler avec leurs conjoints leurs horaires.
Other companies could force workers to take annual leave for a maximum of 6 days. Meanwhile, the closures of schools for parents who can work full-time from home means they will have to do so while also juggling childcare.
Next, to the massive infrastructure investment plan announced by the US president. Tell us, Stephen, what's in it and how is it going to be paid for?
Well, the $2.3 trillion plan includes money for fixing roads, expanding broadband access and funding research and development of greener modes of transport. Joe Biden described this plan as a once-in-a-generation investment in America. Now, he wants to pay for that primarily through increasing the tax on companies. There are 2 main changes on the table. One is that the top rate of corporate tax would increase. Under Donald Trump's tax cuts passed in 2017, that came down from 35% to 21%. Joe Biden wants it to go back up to 28%. The president also wants to increase the minimum tax that American companies pay on their profits made abroad. That's currently a floor of 10.5%. The proposal would see it double to 21%. That's important outside of the United States for 2 reasons. 1, it could influence how US companies operate abroad. And 2, it might help efforts to reform taxation of big digital companies, something been under negotiation for years now at the OECD. A key part of that plan is to ensure that companies pay a minimum rate of tax and don't shift their profits around the world to avoid paying taxes.
So this news, it's had a positive impact on the markets?
Investors like investment plans and spending plans like this, so that has been generally one of the factors playing into optimism on the markets. The start of trading in Europe today, European markets opening up, although not by very much, it has to be said. We're keeping an eye on Deliveroo shares today. They had crashed on their first day's trading. We thought there was a bit of a recovery at the start of trading, but they were back into negative territory after a couple of minutes in London, so that's one to keep an eye on. In Asia earlier, we had gains on markets there as well. Some positive economic data in South Korea and Japan also helping investor optimism there. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong up 1.5%.
Finally, from you, Stephen, some major companies have spoken out against a recent change to the voting law in the United States.
So 2 of the biggest companies in the state of Georgia, CocaCola and Delta Airlines, have come out strongly against a voting reform law that was passed last week. The law introduces stricter ID requirements for voters and limits the use of drop boxes for ballots. Campaigners say the measures will mostly impact black voters. The chief executive of Delta Airlines described the changes as unacceptable and contrary to Delta's values. He said that he'd be working with state officials to help amend the law. Coke's boss made a similar statement. Both companies had come under pressure from the Black Voters Matter campaign group to speak out against the changes. Of course, they chose to do so after the law had been passed.
Interesting. Stephen Carl, thanks a lot for that business update.